Welcome to the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast, brought to you by wowdigital.com, your best place for nonprofit websites and design, now including fractional CMO support. Are you worried that your nonprofit isn't prepared for a crisis? Gertha Jean reveals how a few smart risk strategies can protect your mission, boost trust, and help you lead with confidence. Stay tuned and let's crisis-proof your digital strategy. Welcome to the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. As always, I'm your host, David, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about crisis readiness, digital risk, and building trust. And I've got Gertha Jean here with me. But before we continue, I want to mention that our podcast needs your help. If you find this episode or any of the others insightful, interesting, or helpful, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. It really does help our podcast out. With 15 years of experience, Gertha is the CEO of OWIG Risk Management. That's pronounced OWIG. She's also a nonprofit founder herself, helping organizations stay ready, not reactive, by creating practical, smart risk strategies that work. Thanks so much for joining, Gertha. How's your day going so far?
Going great, David. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think this is going to be a really, really great and interesting episode for a lot of people. There aren't a lot of times when we're thinking about risk management, and there's a lot of thinking in terms of nonprofits. Now, I worked at a hospital for about just under 5 years. And as you can imagine, we had all kinds of risk assessments, like if there was a bomb threat, if there was a fire, if everybody was diverting away from other hospitals in terms of like mega crisis, city shutdown type scenarios. And we ran through, what does that look like? How do we communicate? What systems do we have in place to get information out to the families of residents or loved ones or caregivers or anything like that? That's probably a little bit extreme in terms of like what most nonprofits might be thinking about. You know, as an agency, we have insurance, right? Nonprofits should have insurance. So you have error and omission, you have general liability. Something a lot of people aren't thinking about is cyber insurance. Like, what if your organization gets hit with malware or crypto locker stuff or this or that? So let's just start at the beginning here, because I think I just totally like threw a whole bunch of stuff at people here. But what does it really mean for a nonprofit to be crisis ready? And why should digital first organizations actually take this seriously?
One of the things that you said, right, is when it comes to risk, we know everywhere, especially when you're a nonprofit, risk is everywhere, right? We know it's there, but how do you prepare for something that you don't know that could eventually happen, right? And I'm so glad that you mentioned insurance, because I feel like a lot of people combine risk management and insurance together. They're like, I'm protected because I have insurance. I'm a very visual person. So a lot of my teaching and education is like through storytelling, right? And I always say, picture this. If it's raining outside, you know it's raining outside. You go outside and you wear a pair of socks, right? What's going to happen? Your socks is going to get wet. But that's the whole point, that you wear the socks to protect your feet, right? And I always tell people that's the insurance. You know that there's going to be an issue, but just in case, I'm going to have this insurance in place to protect my organization, right? But if it's raining outside, you put on your socks, but then you have your rain boots, right? The rain boots is the risk management. That is what's going to protect the socks, which is the insurance. So you don't have to use the insurance, and it's going to save the organization. But I think a lot of people skip the rain boot part, and they don't understand exactly what is risk management, and they don't understand the processes to go ahead and put these things in place. And so I think one of the biggest things when it comes to nonprofit is realizing that risk can be anything. It's not always a pandemic, you know? It can be not having system in place when something happened. You don't know how to communicate with your donors. You don't know how to communicate with your staff, but just putting these simple things in place. And that's one of the reasons too, we create like we call it the 3P framework. Back in COVID, they had like a PPP. So at first it was PPP, but everybody thought we were giving out money. So we changed it to the 3P framework, which is prevention, preparation, and protection when it comes to risk management.
I love that idea, the concept of the sock with the boots. And I think what a lot of nonprofits are probably more like is they've got the socks on, but they've taken some tape and they've put it on the bottom of their foot. So they're like, all right, yeah, we got this. We know what we're doing in case of an emergency, but there's no formal documentation around the process. Risk management isn't just about necessarily like PR or crisis management. It could also be you've got somebody in your team that has taken a new job somewhere else, and now there's a gap, there's a hole, there's a void. Do you have your SOPs, your standard operating procedures in place so you know what to do, how things were done, and it's documented so that somebody could take over with minimal downtime, right? And it's those type of processes. I mean, back when I was at the hospital, that was, let's see, I left there in 2016. So we're talking like 10 years ago. There weren't really SOPs the way that you can do them nowadays. There's all kinds of platforms that you can get to help with SOPs, especially in the digital world. We had binders. We had communication plan binders, emergency preparedness binders, bright red binders. They were like the 4, 5, 6-inch binders, printed things. There's one at the comms desk, one in our department because I was in marketing communications. There was one, I think, with IT. There was one with building and planners. And anytime there was a change, we had to print off new things, swap them out in the like ridiculous kind of like you think about it now and it's like, why? Like, why? But if the computer systems are down, if there's total power outage, if you are like emergency, like a hospital giving care, if systems go down, if power goes down, there was a huge ice storm. We had to move residents into a local Holiday Inn. We called and got rooms. You know, what do we do? That's something like, how would we have ever thought about, you know, that maybe being an issue? There was a power generator. Yeah. Right? We couldn't get the fuel. It was a citywide outage, like wild, absolutely wild.
One of the nonprofits that we specialize working in is community health centers, right? So we work a lot with hospitals and foster cares, and we work with like food banks, like the community service nonprofits. And you would be surprised, David, because honestly speaking, I know me, if there is an incident, we have these binders that you talk about, but when it happens, do you know where the binder is? Or you have to dust through it and you have to like flip through the pages. Don't get me wrong, those binders are great, but in a situation where the intensity is high, the risk is very high, you need to make these processes simple and easy. So I always use this analogy of Hansel and Gretel, right? Because the story with Hansel and Gretel is that they left breadcrumbs. And so the first step with any crisis is to leave those breadcrumbs, and you want to make it easy for your team or whoever is in charge. And I always say, put 3 simple things on those breadcrumbs: who to contact, what to do, what the follow-up is. Once they have those things, then it'll make the process easier, and then we can go through the binder. But I'm telling you, if the power went out and it's dark and I can't find that binder, what am I to do? So if we can go back, and like I said, I love telling stories, if you don't notice about me, because like I said, I'm a very visual person, and risk management is a very complicated subject. And so you have to make it in a way that people can understand. And so when it comes to the 3P framework that we talk about, which is prevention, preparation, and protection, right? If we can go back to Hansel and Gretel, prevention is spotting out those risks, right? What are the gaps? What are we missing? What if you do a list of what can go wrong and how we can go ahead and put that boot on that sock, correct, right? With Hansel and Gretel, they left breadcrumbs. And so what you want to do is you want to leave these breadcrumbs behind for your staff or your donors so they would know what to do in an event of a risk, right? And I always say, make sure to keep it simple, make it easy for them to understand. Always 3 things on a breadcrumb: who to contact, what to do, and the follow-up. So once you have those 3 things on that breadcrumb, you can know what to do, and it will make it so much easier for your team, and it will make it so much easier for the organization to run smoothly.
I totally, absolutely 100% agree. And we need to be thinking, if there is some kind of major emergency, people are going to be panicking,
Yes.
right? If we make things simple, it's easy to follow. We have a clear guide, do this, call this person, do this, right? And it makes it really, really easy. Let's kind of keep the nerves kind of calm so we can think clearly. That should probably be the first thing. Stay calm, think clearly, call emergency whoever, right? And work through it, right? But an online presence supports the mission without, accidentally increasing reputational or security risks is kind of the goal there. But how do you see how nonprofits can leverage that?
I think one of the things that I've noticed is that when it comes to digital or even being online, it is such a great tool that some nonprofits are not utilizing to their full potential. So we talk about risk, right? And sometimes, like I said, risk is not always a pandemic. It's not something major. Risk can be something simple as not following up or using certain platforms to create more revenue, to create more donors, to create more awareness, right? So let's take, for example, being digitally online. So many nonprofits, I feel, are afraid of social media, do not utilize the importance of social media or even having a simple website because they are afraid of that risk. What if I post something wrong? Or what if a comment is given wrong? Or if I did the wrong picture, or I didn't have this person permission? All of these things are important, but once you have that proper waivers and you have all these things in place, use social media, use your digital platform, because there's so many opportunities out there. Like, let's take, for example, we have a nonprofit, right? And we've had so many people reach out to us because of our use of social media. They've seen the events that we've done. They've seen the impact that we've made. And so many people out there want to be part of that impact. But if you're staying within your geography and there's a whole world out there, you can go ahead and utilize that too. But don't be afraid of the risk, but just putting those things in place to go ahead to enhance your nonprofit.
I think the benefit definitely outweighs the risk. And yes, you can put protections in place if you need approval processes, if you have a volunteer or an intern or a placement student that's working and helping out. You can put approval processes in place to make sure, okay, yes, this does meet the guidelines. You can have them put together a document that you review before anything goes up. Right? You could have a month of content. I was just talking about this, I think, in the last podcast episode, but on the wall behind me, for anybody that's watching this, yes, we do have video. Check it out on YouTube podcast. But I guess we're also putting it on Spotify podcast. But I've got this board on the wall behind me where we actually plan out the content for the entire year. And then every month we figure out, all right, who's going to do what? And when are they going to do it? And we've got our standard, like every Thursday we push out our email, that kind of thing. So you can build in systems and processes to mitigate a lot of that risk if you are thinking that that's an issue. From digital missteps that you've seen nonprofits make, is there anything that, might seem small, but actually puts their credibility at risk?
I think one of the missteps is, if we're talking about reputation, right? So let's just say if we're talking about an incident that occurred, right? A lot of nonprofits, they go silent, and that's a no-no. Like, do not go silent, because with the world that we are in media right now, whoever wrote it first, that's who everybody's going to believe. And I always say, because they don't know what to say in that incident, you do a simple announcement. We are aware of the situation. We are working on it. That's it. I didn't tell you what the situation was. I didn't tell you how we're working on it, but you're letting people know that we are aware of the situation and then we are working on it. And then internally, you also have that process. Okay, how are we going to contact our donors? How are we going to contact our employees? Who's in charge of that? Internally, you're working on that internally, but externally, do not be silent.
Communication is extremely vital, especially when there's some kind of emergency or crisis. Not that long ago, there was a huge Cloudflare outage on November 18th. It spilled into the 19th, and a lot of systems and sites and things went down. Were they able to communicate? Well, if Twitter was your main point of connecting with your audience, guess what? X had huge outages too. So how can we connect with people? What are the other different ways that are available? Planning for it. Going, okay, if this isn't working, then what's the backup? If the backup's not working, what's the third one? And I really do believe in triplicate in terms of being able to have fallback procedures. We did a server upgrade in the beginning of November, and we had a backup date. I think it was November 3rd, and then November 10th was our backup date in case there was a problem. We planned for there to be a problem. Thankfully, we didn't, and everything was fine. But how can we think about that? Do you have any tips for people that are watching this, listening to this, in terms of when should they plan like multiple scenario backup things?
So this is the second P in the 3P framework, right? The first one is prevention. It happened, we learned from it. The second one is preparation, right? What's the whole point of going through something if you're not prepared for it? And so when it comes to preparation, let's take the example with Cloudflare, right? So we know if we prepared for the situation and we know that our only source was online and that is not going to work. Okay, now we need to have plan A, plan B, plan C, correct? So when it comes to preparation, I always say, think of every avenue or think of every risk that's possible. For example, one of the things a lot of my clients are going through right now is funding. So a lot of changes happening in the economy and a lot of donors are pulling back. And so what we're realizing right now, which was a huge risk, was a lot of those funding was either coming from a certain group of donors or a certain funder, correct? And so I say, look at the pie. If more than 50% of your funding is coming from one general area, you are complete at risk. So what we have to do now is divide that pie up. We can say this is coming from this funder. What other streams of revenues that we can do to get those things? So like you have the perfect example is preparation. And with every nonprofit, it's different. But having that preparation and looking at that whole pie and slicing it up, because if this pie is taken out, we're still good until we can go ahead and put another slice in.
Love that idea, right? We need to diversify where funding is coming from so that we can make sure that the organization isn't at severe risk. I would say 50% for sure is an issue. I would say 30% is also still an issue. The last year has had a lot of shifts in terms of funding from federal, local, provincial, state, whatever. And there's a new reality. And how can we shift away from that? And how can we lean into it to appeal to people? Because everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people understand what's going on. If there's a cause that they care about, a lot of organizations don't want to say, hey, we're struggling, right? But imagine if you went to people that already care about your organization, that have already been making donations for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, even if it's $50 a year, $5 a year, saying, hey, the new reality is this, we need your support more now than ever. I think there's something to be said for that.
I think right now too is that we need to go back to the basics. With that being said, like I work with nonprofits. I started a nonprofit. I'm on multiple boards. So when I say this, I'm seeing this from different, and plus I donate too. So I'm seeing it from different angles, is that as nonprofits, we need to go back to the basic, because right now we are at limited resources. And so many leaders are burnt out. There's stress, some which is out of their control. But let's utilize the resources that we have right now, which is your mission and the impact that the nonprofit is doing, right? And one of the things that you talk about so much on your podcast, and that's why I'm a huge fan, I was like, oh, it's storytelling, right? And we forget it's a simple thing, but we forget the importance of storytelling when it comes to nonprofits. You are doing an amazing work. You are doing wonderful things. You are changing lives. You're bringing so much impact, but you're not doing that storytelling. You're not letting people know what you're doing. And it's not boasting, because the mission is in there, but if people do not know, they don't know how to support you. So let's go back to the basics. Let's use storytelling. Let's use the impact. Let's reach out to more people and say, hey, and be honest. Hey, I am struggling. You're not begging, because if there is a need, because how would you know what my response is if I don't know what your need is? So I think that's one of the things too when it comes to nonprofit, is just going back to the basics.
Absolutely. And I would argue with most nonprofits out there, when you have your donation form, it's going to sound bad, but on the donation form, don't give people an option where the funding should be going to. It should be going to general operations or wherever it's needed most. And a lot of times you'll have a drop down field that has like 15 different things in there. And then at the bottom is where it's needed most, right? I would say get rid of that altogether, and just it goes into the general pot, so that as an organization, you can strategically use the money where it's actually needed most. If you have legacy, memorial, donation forms and things like that, build one-offs for those. But your overall main donation form that you're driving traffic to should be for general purpose. That way you can leverage that how you need.
Yes. I agree 110% on that. And just to add on to that too, as well, is, bringing in that risk management component to it, right? I know we use the story of Hansel and Gretel, right? And with the story of Hansel and Gretel, we use that in the 3P framework. At the end, which leads us to our third P, which is protection, right? So at the end of the story, when Hansel and Gretel, they went back to their dad, and when their dad was like, I'm so sorry this happened, and they're like, you don't have to worry about it, Dad, because we got all this gold. So they took the gold from the witch, right? And I use that analogy as protection, right? So as you go through these things, is that you have to put things in place that is going to protect the organization, right? And so what we're doing is we're learning from our mistakes, and we are bringing that resilience in, and we're bringing those protections. I know in the beginning we talked about insurance. So let's use the stuff that we already have to better our organization. One of a policy that most, if not shame on you, nonprofits need to have is a D&O policy, right? Which is a directors and officers policy that protects your board members in case, if anybody says that the decision making costs anything and they go to file a lawsuit against your board, it's going to protect them, the board, and their personal asset, right? So you're paying for this policy. You're already paying for this policy. And this is type of protection, but how are you using that policy to go ahead and attract new board members? So a lot of board members, if they see that you have a D&O policy, they're going to say, you know what? You care about your board. You're reliable. You have these things in place. So use the protection that you have already, the risk that you have already, to go ahead and attract new board members or attract donors, because there are so many things that are being paid for, but there's byproducts for those things.
I love the idea of leveraging the risk to help you get to where or whatever it is that you need, right? I talk about strategic partnerships with businesses, right? One of my workshops that I run is how can you get corporate sponsors? You can get corporate sponsors to help you mitigate the risk.
Exactly.
Right? Maybe it's backup infrastructure, maybe it's their expertise, maybe it's some time value, maybe it's some software, right? There's all kinds of things in the digital world that you can leverage to help you mitigate that risk. Okay, so we talked about a whole bunch of stuff till now. The 3 Ps, why you need to be thinking this way. Let's talk actual, real, tangible tactics here, right? So people that are listening to this, maybe they don't have a formal crisis plan. It's probably something that just like lives in their head, and they're like, oh, okay, well, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. But if somebody's listening and they realize they don't actually have a formal crisis plan, what's the very first step that they should take like today?
The very first step to take today is to prevention, right? We have a crisis readiness guide that walks you step by step on what to do. So the first step with everything that you have to do is the prevention. Figure out what is your risk. Let's take, for example, cyber risk. We all know that it's going to happen, right? What training are in place so that your staff know what to do besides the insurance? We all know we need the insurance. We all know that, right? And exactly what if there was a cyber attack, who is the first person that we contact? Is it our IG department? Is it executive director? Who is the first person that we contact? And then you want to go on, find the who, and then what? What do we do next? Do we have cyber insurance? Do we contact our insurance professional? And 9 out of 10, the insurance professionals, they will send you somebody, right? But you want to make sure that you have your internal things, okay? What was the issue? Did somebody click a phishing email? And figuring out those issues. So you have the who, the what, the when. How long is this process going to take for me to rectify all of these things? Who am I going to contact? Should I let my clients know? Should I let the donors know, right? And then we go again with why. Why did it happen? And then that's when we go with the preparation, the things, the different steps that we take. So if you go with who, what, when, why, then you can go ahead and have those. And I always say simplify everything. Make it easy for everything once there's a panic, so nobody can be like, something happens and they're like, I don't know. Where's the binder? I don't know. Who do I call? I don't know. Who's in charge? I don't know. And then David, honestly, it leads from leadership too, because, as the leadership needs to have all these things because it flows from the head down.
Absolutely. And one of the things that is important for organizations to be thinking about is the training plan. It's really important to know, all right, if this happens, we do this, right? But what is the mitigation? What is the staff training? When I was working at the hospital, one of my roles, there were two kind of other sub roles that I worked with legal department. One of them was compliance training for accessibility. So what is the risk to your organization if you're not accessible? We know that there's lawsuits and things like that happen. That's for physical space, like can somebody in a wheelchair get over that step to get access to area? Or somebody who has a physical impairment, can they open a really heavy door that's blocking the hallway or coming into the building, that kind of thing. There's digital accessibility for websites and that. The other part of it was the compliance. So running training annually, having the staff that are responsible for managing the website in this situation that we're talking about, sign a paper saying that they went through the training. So that way there's some responsibility. It all didn't sit on me or the legal department, that everybody that managed it. So what processes can we put in place, not just for the situation when and if something should happen, but to help prevent it to begin with?
Yeah, and like how you said too with training, and sometimes we take the word training and we're like, it's just a check, check the box. I took this training, but there's no practical training. We do something with our clients, what we call it like play, right? And so we actually do these trainings, whereas if this situation was to happen, I want to see how your team is going to handle it. Not just saying, I sat down and, if this has happened, then I need to push the door. No, we need to physically see how this is going to happen, because in any situation, when it's a high intense situation, you're not going to remember what you sat down, and so we do these things. Exactly. And then we tweak it. We're like, you know what? There was an extra step that really didn't need to be there. And so that's the thing too, like, don't just check the box, because you can say I'm prepared for it, but in that situation, are you truly prepared for it? And I said, the risk is something that because you can be prepared for one type of risk and then boom, another one happens, but you're constantly learning from it. But like I said in the beginning, is having that boot there, knowing that boot. I rather have a boot there than have nothing. And I'm like, I have soggy feet.
Exactly. There's a reason that in schools, they do fire alarm testing. They want to see how everybody handles the situation. They don't tell you that they're doing it. I mean, the principal, vice principal, like they know what's going on, right? But the teachers typically don't know. The students don't know what is the scenario and how is it handled and what should happen, what training needs to happen, what assembly do they need to have to like inform all the students, hey, when this happens, you should be doing this, not, skipping down the hallway. Right? So I think that's definitely an important piece. Are there any red flags or overlooked areas that you find might signal that a nonprofit is vulnerable to a crisis?
Burnout, and sometimes, crisis is the simplest thing. One of the things that I've noticed is burnout, because once the leader is burnt out, it affects the organization. So one of the red flags is when I'm talking to a leader and I realize that they have a lot on their plate. They're managing the organization, the funding and the programs and different things. And a lot of these things slip through the cracks. A lot of the things that you thought that they would have stuff in place, they slip through the cracks. So burnout is the number one. The second thing is binders. Something simple as binders. You have everything documented, but nobody knows what to do. So having everything documented and having everything in a binder is not going to help you in that situation. Leave those breadcrumbs, make it easy and simple so everybody can understand. And then the third thing is communication. Nobody knows who's going to handle what. And I know these are simple things, but it's the simple things that cause the biggest risk. Because I have met with leaders and I'm like, okay, so who handles this? The COO. I go to the COO. Oh, it's not, I don't do it. It's the IT department. And I go to the IT and IT is like, oh, it's the executive director. And nobody knows their roles or their position, and they don't know what to do in that situation. So those are the three things that I would say is burnout, the binders, and then communication. Once we do an assessment and those three things, that's a huge red flag that, okay, it's time to get you ready.
That's awesome. Gertha, amazing insights and thoughts around digital risk, crisis prep, building trust with the community and inside the organization, and helping people really understand about risk and why it's something important. And I hope the folks that have been listening or watching this have been able to get some great advice and some pointers from you. If you were to give everybody listening to this a challenge, something you wanted them to do within 24 hours of listening to the episode, what would that challenge be?
The challenge would be is write your breadcrumb list. 3 things to include in your breadcrumb: who to call, what to do in that situation, and what's the follow-up. What did we learn? So you make a list in that situation. Who do I call? If it's a cyber situation, it's a PR situation, patient situation, who is that person to call? What to do? Do I contact this person, or do I take care of this matter myself, or whatever that what is, and what is the follow-up? What did we learn from the situation? Do that breadcrumb list and it'll be easy peasy.
Awesome. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what do they need to do?
You can find me and you can go to our website. It's www.owigrisk.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me at Gertha Jean, or you can find our social media outlets, which is Owigrisk on Facebook, TikTok, all the social media platforms.
Amazing. And before the show, before we hit record, we were talking that you've got like a free nonprofit crisis readiness guide. Tell us about that.
Okay, so if anybody who knows me knows that I always refer to my nonprofit leaders as nonprofit besties. That's what, every time I'm like, hey, nonprofit besties. And I always have a gift for my nonprofit besties because I've been in their shoes. I understand. And so with the 3P framework, we've created a crisis readiness guide, which breaks everything down simple, the different steps that you need to take, who to go ahead and put on your list, what to include in that what section, what is a crisis. We have a scorecard to see where you are in your crisis position with your organization, and it is free to download. You can download it if you go to our website, www.owigrisk.com. You click download and they'll send to you. And that's it. And because I like to give my besties freebies.
I love that. That's so great. Thanks again for joining in, Gertha. It's been great having you here on the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. To everybody listening, if you want any more details about what we talked about, we've got the full transcript, we have the video, we have the audio recording, we've got links to OWIG's website and all of the amazing content that we've been talking about. Just head over to our podcast show notes page at nonprofitdigitalsuccess.com. Click on this episode for all the details. And until next time, keep on being successful.